Have you ever felt an emptiness after retirement, telling yourself that reconnecting with old friends would make the loneliness disappear? I used to think that too. When work was no longer a part of my life, when the busy days had faded away, I believed that meeting old friends would bring back a sense of belonging. But I was wrong. If you're expecting reunions filled with laughter and conversations that feel just as familiar as they once were, I urge you to think again. Friendships change over time, and sometimes, seeing old friends doesn't bring joy. It only highlights how much life has changed. Today, I want to share 5 reasons why reconnecting with old friends may not be the solution to loneliness after retirement. More importantly, I'll help you discover what truly fills that void. I've tried and failed, but I've also found a way to build a more meaningful life. Stay with me until the end of this video. What I'm about to share might help you avoid the mistakes I once made. The first reason: friendships are not the same anymore. I remember my first day after retirement so vividly. I felt relieved, but also a bit lost. No more morning meetings, no more alarm clocks, no more long busy days. And then, the emptiness crept in. I told myself that the best solution was to reconnect with old friends, the ones who had shared so many memories with me over the decades. Excited, I made a list, flipped through my contacts, and started making calls. I thought that once we met again, everything would be just like before. The same laughter, the same cherished stories. But I was wrong. The first person I called was a close friend from my younger days, someone I used to see every day at work. He answered cheerfully but with a tone of distance. When I suggested grabbing a coffee, he hesitated, saying he was busy watching his grandkids and that we should plan for another time. But that another time never came. I reached out to a few more people. Some had moved to another state to be closer to their children. Others were caught up in their own routines, and some simply didn't have much to say anymore. My calls, instead of rekindling connections, only reminded me how much life had moved on. When we were working, friendships seemed effortless. We shared the same daily rhythm. Conversations revolved around work, family, and life's little struggles. Stepping out of the office, there was always someone to grab lunch with. Plans didn't need scheduling because everything followed a familiar orbit. But after retirement, everyone had their own path. Some were wrapped up in the joys of family, busy caring for grandchildren. Others were traveling, exploring new passions they had never had time for before. And then there were people like me, feeling disconnected but unsure of how to fill the void. I remember one particular meeting after months of trying to reconnect. I finally met up with an old friend, someone who had once been my closest confidant during stressful workdays. We had always encouraged each other to push forward. But as we sat across from each other, I realized our conversation no longer flowed as it once did. He spoke about upcoming trips with his wife, about new hobbies I had never heard of. I wanted to share my struggles with retirement, but he wasn't particularly interested. The pauses in our conversation grew longer, and I left that meeting with an unexpected sense of disappointment. After several experiences like this, I began to understand a difficult truth. Not all friendships are meant to last forever. That doesn't mean I don't value them. It simply means our lives have taken different directions. Instead of clinging to the past, I learned to appreciate what once was, and more importantly, I started opening myself up to new possibilities. If you're hoping for a reunion that feels just like old times, remember that time hasn't just changed you. It has changed your friends too. Not everyone will be willing or able to maintain the same relationships, and that's okay. Rather than feeling saddened or disappointed, try seeking out new connections, people who share your current lifestyle and interests. Life after retirement doesn't have to be a repetition of what once was. It can be the beginning of something entirely new. The second reason: we may be looking for joy in the wrong places. After retiring, I thought the first thing I needed to do was reconnect with the joys of my past, especially with my friends. I believed that as long as I had someone to talk to share old stories with, life would no longer feel empty. But I quickly realized that the loneliness I felt after retirement wasn't just about missing my friends. It was about not having a clear purpose to pursue. In the first days after leaving work, I felt relieved, but also restless. No more meetings, no one needing me every day, no responsibilities forcing me to get up in the morning. I tried to fill that emptiness by constantly making plans, calling friends, arranging coffee meetups, lunch dates, even visiting their homes. I thought that simply sitting down together, laughing, and reminiscing would bring back the joy I had once felt. But strangely, every time I returned home after those gatherings, I still felt empty. The conversations didn't bring me the excitement I had hoped for. We talked about old memories, updated each other on our lives, but everyone had their own priorities now. Some were busy taking care of grandchildren, others were traveling, and some simply preferred spending time alone. That was when I started to realize that maybe I had been searching for happiness in the wrong place. One day, I happened to hear an old friend mention that she had joined a painting class. She said she looked forward to it every day, not just because of the painting itself, but because it gave her a chance to meet new people, others who were also searching for something to make their later years more fulfilling. I decided to give it a try and signed up for a local art class. To my surprise, after just a few sessions, my mood began to improve significantly. Encouraged by that experience, I started exploring other activities. I joined a book club where I could discuss my favorite novels with people who shared my interests. I signed up as a volunteer at a local charity, helping to pack meals for the homeless every weekend. Slowly, I began to feel joy returning to my life. But the most important lesson I learned was that happiness doesn't always come from reconnecting with old friends. It often comes from embracing new experiences. I no longer felt like I was desperately holding on to past relationships just to fill a void. I no longer believed that simply having someone sit next to me would take away my loneliness. Instead, I focused on things that gave me a sense of purpose, things that made each day feel worthwhile. If you're feeling lonely and believe that reconnecting with old friends is the only solution, try thinking beyond that. Maybe what you truly need isn't a reunion, but something that makes you feel like your life still holds meaning. Try something new. Get involved in an activity that excites you, and you might just discover a kind of happiness you never expected. 3. Friendship is only meaningful when both parties make an effort. Friendship has always been an important part of my life. When we are young, making friends seems effortless. The coffee meetups, the spontaneous gatherings, the long conversations that stretch into the night. It all feels so natural. But as we grow older, I've come to realize that friendships don't always last forever. They need to be nurtured from both sides, not just by one person's effort. I remember when I first retired, I was eager to stay in touch with my friends. I called them, invited them to lunch, and sent messages to check in. At first, everyone responded warmly, but over time, I noticed a shift. I was always the one initiating plans, while they only replied when I reached out first. There were times when I suggested meeting up, but the responses were often, "I'm busy today," or "maybe another time." After several rejections, I started wondering, if I stopped making the effort, would these friendships still exist? One of the most memorable examples was my friendship with Richard. We had worked together for years and shared so many memories. When I retired, I thought we would have more time to see each other, but things didn't go as I had hoped. I was always the one making the calls, inviting him to lunch, and asking about his family. At first he responded, but gradually his enthusiasm faded. His replies became shorter, sometimes non-existent. One day, I asked myself, if I stop calling, will he ever reach out to me? So, I decided to stop. A week passed, then a month, then 2. Richard never called. At first, I felt disappointed, but then I learned an important lesson. Real friendships cannot be maintained by just one person. If someone no longer wants to stay connected, perhaps it's time to move on. I know many older adults go through the same experience, holding on to old friendships even when they are no longer the same. We send messages, make calls, and plan meetups, only to be met with lukewarm responses. When that happens, we have 2 choices: continue investing energy in a one-sided relationship, or shift our time and attention toward people who genuinely want to be part of our lives. After my experience with Richard, I changed my perspective on friendship. I stopped chasing people who no longer valued my presence. Instead, I opened myself up to new relationships. I joined a book club where I met people who shared my love for reading. I started spending more time with family members who had always been there for me, but whom I had taken for granted. Friendship is only meaningful when both people make an effort. If you find yourself being the only one trying to keep a connection alive, try stepping back. If the friendship truly matters, the other person will reach out. If they don't, take it as a sign that it's time to move forward. Open yourself up to new opportunities and seek relationships that truly bring you joy. 4. Being too clingy to old friends can hinder our growth. When I retired, I had a quiet fear: losing my old friends. I thought that if I kept in touch with them and maintained our conversations as before, I wouldn't feel lonely. I clung to friendships that had lasted for decades, believing they were the only place where I could find real connection. But then I realized that holding on too tightly to what's familiar can make us miss out on the wonderful things waiting ahead. Back then, I spent hours calling old friends, inviting them out for coffee, reminiscing about the beautiful memories of our younger days. But over time, our conversations became dull. I felt like I was desperately holding on to something that was no longer the same. My friends, like me, had changed with time. Some were busy with their families, some preferred solitude, and others simply no longer wanted to keep in touch as often. I remember my friend Barbara, who struggled even more than I did. She had been lively and sociable when she was working, but after retirement, she found it nearly impossible to adjust to her new life. She believed that if she held on tightly to her old friends, she would never feel lonely. She spent her days making phone calls, sending messages, and waiting for someone to make plans with her. But the harder she tried, the more disconnected she felt. One day she asked me, "Why does it feel like the more I try, the lonelier I become?" Then, one day, her daughter suggested she join a dance class for seniors. At first, Barbara refused outright. "I've never danced a day in my life." But after much persuasion, she reluctantly attended a session. To her surprise, it became a turning point in her life. There, she met new people, others who were also looking for joy and connection. Within weeks, she stopped talking about her old friends and instead shared her excitement about the new things she was learning and the new people she was meeting. In the end, she realized that life isn't just about looking back. It's about discovering new joys in the present. Watching Barbara's journey made me reflect on my own life. Had I been doing the same thing? I had been so afraid of losing my old friends that I forgot I could build new relationships. I decided to try something different. I joined a book club for seniors in my neighborhood and slowly opened myself up to people who shared my interests. And I learned something important. Connection doesn't always come from the people we've known for years. It can also come from those we've yet to meet. I'm not saying we should forget our old friends, but if those relationships no longer bring us joy, maybe it's time to try something new. Don't be afraid to open yourself up to new experiences. Join a club, pick up a new hobby, or simply start a conversation with a stranger. Because you never know, that might just be the key to finding true happiness after retirement. 5. Not all friendships bring positive energy. I used to believe that friendship was forever, that the people who had walked alongside us for years would always be a source of support and joy in our lives. But over time, I realized that not all friendships bring positive energy. Some relationships, no matter how long they've lasted, can leave us feeling drained rather than uplifted. After retiring, I made an effort to stay in touch with some old friends. I wanted to maintain those close bonds, to have meaningful conversations that would make this new chapter of life richer. But gradually, I started noticing something. Every time we met, instead of feeling happier, I felt exhausted. One of those friends was Martha, someone I had known for over 30 years. She used to be so full of life, but after retirement, everything seemed to change. Every conversation revolved around her health problems, her dissatisfaction with life, and endless reminiscing about the past. I listened, comforted her, and tried to encourage her, but each time I left, I felt like a dark cloud was hanging over me. I carried her worries and negativity home with me, and it affected my mood for the rest of the day. I started asking myself, was this friendship truly adding something good to my life? I didn't want to abandon a friend, but I also couldn't keep meeting someone who made me feel heavier each time we spoke. One day I decided to try something different. Instead of only reconnecting with old friends who seemed stuck in negativity, I sought out those who had a more positive outlook. I joined a morning Tai Chi group at the park. That's where I met Helen, a woman my age who was full of energy. We talked about interesting things, books we were reading, new recipes we had tried, little plans we were excited about. I realized that real friendship isn't just about how long you've known someone, it's about how they make you feel when you're with them. There's a truth I think everyone needs to recognize. We have the right to choose who stays in our lives. If a relationship no longer brings joy, we are not obligated to hold on to it just because of the past. I've learned to spend time with people who make me feel comfortable and happy, rather than those who leave me feeling drained. If you find yourself in a friendship that feels more like a burden than a source of joy, ask yourself, how do I feel after each interaction? Do I feel energized and uplifted? Or do I feel like I'm just enduring it? Sometimes letting go doesn't mean losing something, it means making space for something better. If you're feeling lonely and believe that reconnecting with old friends will fill the void, take a moment to pause and reflect. Friendship is a precious thing, but it's not always the answer to the emptiness that can come after retirement. Life isn't just about reminiscing on the past, it's about how we create joy and meaning in the present. Ask yourself, are you seeking out friends because you genuinely want to connect, or are you simply afraid of change? If your old friendships still bring you happiness, cherish them. But if they leave you feeling drained, perhaps it's time to open yourself up to new experiences. Learn a new skill, join an activity, meet new people. Sometimes, happiness comes from things you've never tried before. If you found these thoughts helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so I can continue bringing you meaningful stories and lessons. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, and let's continue the conversation.